Hi, I'm Gretchen Gamalka with Plant and Moran, and I'm here today to talk to you at the request of the Michigan Dental Association. I could present some ideas to help mitigate the risk for fraud within the societies, and really this would be by implementing maybe 5 or 6 really strong controls that could help mitigate that risk, as I mentioned. So without further ado, I'm going to get into some of those controls. The first thing that we're going to talk about is bank statements. And really, the bank statement should be coming to someone other than the individual who's responsible for writing the checks and keeping the accounting records. And it should be mailed directly to someone else from the bank. And that individual, whether it's the board chair or someone, can really open the bank statement up fresh, make sure it hasn't been altered, look at the activity that's occurred during the month. Does it make sense? Is it what you would expect? And then the bank statement can be shipped off to the individual responsible for reconciling that to the activity and what's recorded in the accounting system. And then once the reconciliation has been complete, that reconciliation should then be reviewed to make sure that, again, any outstanding checks make sense, or any other reconciling items, whether they be errors, deposits in transit, should be coming back to that individual who initially opened the bank statement. And along with that reconciliation, really we suggest a check register for all checks written during that month be sent along with it. And then you could open up that bank statement, or you have the bank statement already opened, I should say. You're going to look at that bank statement, look at the check registers. Did all the checks clear? Oh, I noticed these ones didn't clear. Are they on a reconciling item? Is there anything on that reconciling item list that I can't account for? It's not a check. I don't know what it is. Ask the question. Say, what is this? Really get an understanding. Make sure that it makes sense. And that's really the first step. We really recommend bank statements. Separate those duties. Make sure the activity is being looked at by more than one individual. Just wanted to talk a little bit about checks in general and writing checks. And the person responsible for cutting the check, whether it's cut through an electronic system or written out by hand, should not be the same person who's signing the check. Really, someone else should say, yes, I'm giving my approval, we're going to write this check out. And another thing that sometimes might happen in some places with limited staff is someone might write out their signature on a bunch of blank checks because they don't have time monthly or more frequently as checks are due to sign each check. Really, you should never ever sign a blank check. You're really putting yourself at risk too, because you've in essence given approval for a check that hasn't even been written yet, and that's your signature. So really, they should be signed whether you want to write checks once a month, have them get together, meet, or have them put in the mail to you so you can sign them, send them back, whatever works with your locale. But that's the biggest thing, separating that. And then additionally, I understand some societies may have ATM cards associated with their bank accounts. We really challenge you to think, do you need an ATM card? What purpose is it serving? When are you going to need to draw cash? And are you really able to do that through your check system? Could you write up an invoice detailing cash for XYZ, get it approved, and then just write a check, whether it's to yourself, which could be okay as long as it's getting approval and signed by the proper person. The individual writing a check could perhaps need to get cash to make a tip to somebody who is at a venue. But really a good way you could do it without an ATM card is to get the proper approvals, get the check signed, write a check to yourself, get that cash, and turn that cash over. It's really about getting approval, and using the ATM card doesn't lend itself to that, and can open up the door to more risks. Next, I wanted to talk about the person responsible for reviewing the bank statements and the reconciliations is also, as we recommended, should be receiving a check register. And one thing they can do with that check register is really look through the check register at all the vendors who've been paid during that month and ask themselves, does this make sense? Does this activity make sense? Is this vendor appropriate? And also, are we seeing duplicate payments for the same thing? Do the amounts look correct? Do you see any potential related parties where there could be some sort of conflict of interest? Like, oh, she paid her son to do this, or her daughter, or his daughter, or his wife. I mean, really kind of looking at, does it make sense? And again, if something doesn't look right, Doesn't mean it's wrong, but don't be afraid to ask. Your role as an officer of the board is to understand all the activity and really ask the questions, and don't feel like you're horning in on someone's job or offending them, because and that's your role, and you can ask it in such a way as just to gain an understanding. Another good control that we really recommend, since the reviewer of the bank statements is also going to be receiving the check registers and looking at the vendors and making sure they make sense, is to periodically just sample some expenditures and ask for the supporting documentation. Ask for a copy of an invoice, or maybe it was an email giving someone approval to write a check. Ask for the support, and just, it's not questioning somebody's work and what is this. It's really an established procedure you've put in place that we're going to periodically test so many expenditures and make sure that they make sense. And this really makes the person who's doing the accounting, writing the checks, accountable for the activity, because they never know when something is going to be selected to be tested, and it's going to keep them on their toes and make them think, I'm not even going to try and do fraud here, because I know I don't want to get busted, and they're looking too close at all the details. So that's really something, do that periodic sampling. It doesn't take a lot of time, and it doesn't have to be every month. It could be just hit or miss. They never know when you're going to do it, and you could do it from any time during the year. I want to look at this invoice from 3 months ago, or I want to look at this one you did yesterday. I wanted to talk a little bit about budgets too, and really look at your budgets and see how detailed are they? How formalized are they? Is the board voting and approving on the budget? Is the board looking at the actual expenditures compared to budget? Do they look out of whack? If you budgeted $8,000 for an event, but it came in at $20,000, ask a question. What is going on? Well, maybe it makes sense, and maybe you revise the budget. Maybe something was recorded incorrectly. It's really, you have to look at those budget to actuals, because without them, the budget doesn't do you any good. I mean, that's really the board's tool to say, here's where we expect our expenditures to fall in line, and if they don't meet those benchmarks and those expectations, you really got to look into them and see if that they make sense. Another thing that, is a really good thing we'll keep with some of the transparency is sending those budgets down to your members so they know what exactly you're spending their membership dollars on, and what kind of activities are going on. That would really help with some of the transparency, and people, in this day and age, kind of worried about fraud happening everywhere, more and more stories coming out every day. So basically those are the big things we wanted to touch on. I really wanted to talk about bank statements, making sure they're going to someone other than the preparer, they're being properly reviewed, checks aren't being written carte blanche, you're just signing off your name on some blank checks. Reviewing the vendors, does the vendor list make sense? Are the expenditures appropriate? Looking at budget to actual, testing documentation, supporting documentation for what's going on, holding everyone accountable for what their job duties are. And finally, I can't stress this enough, it's so important to ask questions. Your role as an officer on the board is to understand and ask questions, and don't feel that it's not your place. Don't feel like you're putting someone out. Really, the more questions you can ask, the more you're going to have a better understanding, and the more you're going to be able to protect that fiduciary trust and responsibility that's been placed in you. You don't want to make yourself or your practice liable because of you weren't holding people accountable and you weren't asking the right questions. The best way to prevent the fraud is just to have these controls in place, be aware, look at all the activity, look at the detail, and know what's going on, and catch fraud before it gets out of hand. If there's any questions that you guys have on anything I've talked about, you're welcome to contact the MDA.